I'm Tina McElroy Anza. This is my old stomping grounds. I think I have been invited to the workshop conference maybe 4 or 5 times. Yeah, and as we writers always say, y'all think that we're in each other's kitchens and talking and visiting all the time. If we didn't have these conferences, we'd never see each other. Am I right? Well, I'm a writer. I live on St. Simon's Island. I'm from Macon, Georgia. I went to Spelman College, and I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I was one of those little Southern girls who listened to stories on the front porch. I was lucky enough to have been brought up at a time when we still had stories on the front porch. And I was the baby of the family, and you know how the baby is. And I was a TV baby because, I know dating myself, but TVs just came in. They were new, and everybody didn't have one in the neighborhood. And so you had people from all over coming in to look at, especially if there was colored folks on the television, Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald, or somebody like that. But I noticed that the TV, no matter how powerful it was, they turned the TV off when my big daddy told stories on the front porch. And I remember thinking, shoot, I knew power when I saw it, And I said, gosh, even TV can't compete with Big Daddy's stories. And so I knew then that I wanted to tell stories. I grew up blessed enough to be in a family or in a community in a time where there were stories everywhere. I mean, not just stories being told on the front porch, but people telling stories on waiting at the bus stop about what they did last night. I mean, I thought the whole world was made up of stories. My mother read, and she got me to reading, but I would listen to her gossiping on the phone because that's what she would do. And I would think, Mama's such a good storyteller, because she would say, girl, let me tell you what I heard about so-and-so. And in Macon, I don't know about other smallish towns. Macon isn't small. But in smallish towns, people gossip differently. They gossip intimately. Like, let me tell you what happened. It was the biggest fight in the world. She rolled over in bed, and she looked at that man, and she told him. And I would think, even as a child, how did she know he rolled over in the bed? Were they all sleeping in the same bed? What was that about? I mean, but in small towns, he says, it's this intimate detail. It's those details that make the story just so rich. And in our community, in black communities, no matter where you are, we still compete in our music, in hip-hop, in everything. We still compete to get you to pay attention to us, to get that voice, to be seen. To be seen. Dr. Bess was noting this morning that Tiffany Yannick reminded us that the work we were doing is holy. We're doing holy work. And so I think of those stories as really holy. I live on St. Simon's Island off the coast of Georgia, right on the Geechee Gullah corridor. Everybody's familiar? Geechee Gullah? Okay. And the stories there just sort of hang in the air. The people's stories, I can feel we had lunch there. We sure did. And especially at Epworth, where you were staying, over the trees and the water, where the water meets the trees. And the stories just hang in the air. And I always feel like I live on the north end of the island, and I live around the corner from the first schoolhouse, black schoolhouse for recently freed enslaved people from the Butler plantation. And it's just the stories there just seem to be in the soil. When I go to Macon, Georgia, which is my home, oh my God, the stories just hang in the air. It's like I'm picking pomegranates from a tree. So I guess I say all that to say is, I had a writer friend who was encouraging me when I first started writing fiction, and he got me my first agent. And we would talk, and he was an older man. He was as old as my mother. He was born the same year. But he was an established writer, Bill Deal. He was a big deal. He was a New York Times bestselling writer, and he had been in the business a long time and had interesting stories. And then when I met him on the island, we used to talk, and then he asked me if I could, write, and then, it went from one thing to the next thing. I was writing my Baby of the Family on his computer down by the ocean. But one of the things that we would do is he always treated me as a peer, and so we would sit and talk just about everything. And he would talk about coming home from World War II and being a bombardier and all this exciting stuff, riding with, being the photographer for Dr. Martin Luther King. And I would talk about my mama putting on a pan of water every morning for a pan of grits, and that happened every morning, and how it smelled out on my street when it rained. And he valued that just as much. And one day he said, Tina, that's your gold. Your Gold. And I imagined it just like a vein running all through my body. And we all have gold. We all have that vein running through us. And for many writers, you want to go out there and tell the story. That's where the interesting stuff is, not what mama puts on grits every morning. What are you talking about? They want to go out there. But I guess I'm urging you, if there are writers in the group, and I'm hoping that y'all are all writers, creators in some way, is that, remember that you have gold all through here. Whether your mama raised you or whether, the lady who just took you in raised you. Whether you had a big family or whether, that you were only child. Whether you lived in the suburbs or whether you lived in the country, you have all this gold. Black people have all this unmined gold in them. And that's your story. That's where you start from your stories. Now, you may decide, this isn't really what I want to do. But in every story that you write, there has to be that vein of gold. You have to have mined something from that, from your experiences, from your daddy's experiences, from the lady who straightened your hair. I mean, all these experiences, all this rich, rich stuff is what you have to find, and that makes your story. Because there are millions of stories. Well, there's only like 3 stories: boy meets girl, boy. Yeah. But I mean, there are millions of stories out there, and you just have to find your story. But you've got to start from your gold. You can't ignore who you are. You can't ignore where you came from. You can't. In some cases, you can't go forward till you heal some stuff. You can't create what you really want from pain, unless you have put that pain through the fire and gone through it and said, okay, this is my pain, and this is what I had to do. And from this is what I've learned, and now this is my gold. I want all of you to leave here thinking, I can never forget that vein of gold that's running through me. I hope that's an image that you can keep, because that's the image that you'll be going back to again and again and again. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's so true. And I just sort of think about the name of the, it's like all stories are true. I think my impetus to write, which I call my side gig or my hustle, since I'm here on campus teaching writing and literature, comes from this aspect, like you're saying, everyone has this goal, but larger society has sought to erase it.
That's what?
Sought to erase it. Or cover it up. And as I've taught over the many years, I'm not going to say how many because I'd be aging myself, but over the years, I've noticed that in my students, especially when I've taught at HBCUs, I taught at Spelman prior to coming here to Clark, that the knowledge of our forerunners, those who came before us, who did great and powerful things, wasn't there. And so part of what inspired me, starting about 12 years ago, was to think about a way in telling those true stories of those people who have done great things, who had been erased from history, in an entertaining way. That not texts necessarily for me to teach in the classroom or for students to teach, but for students to read, and yes, read for pleasure, outside of class, and come to know and understand, like you're saying, that gold that exists, that, like I said, some have sought to cover it up. So my latest work is called By Her Own Design, and it's about Ann Lowe, who was the black wedding designer of Jacqueline Kennedy's dress when she married John F. Kennedy in 1953. This is a black woman who was an artist, and I think that's where I make my connection to her, is the ways in which Ann Lowe, born in small-town Clayton, Alabama, sought to come from Jim Crow, Alabama in 1898, survived a child marriage at the age of 12, to design for Roosevelt's, Vanderbilt's, and yes, Jackie Kennedy's wedding gown. She had been with the family for a number of years before that commission. If you are a Kennedy person and if you know about the Kennedys, if you read their biographies, she is often described in alternate ways like a seamstress, the family seamstress, and in one Ladies' Home Journal article, a colored seamstress. We all know that in fashion, whenever you see the Oscars or the Met Gala or whatever, you know, people say the first thing that they're asked is, who are you wearing? And there's a response. And in Jackie Kennedy's case, and in the case of the media that covered the more like coronation of that wedding, there were 800 people at the wedding and 1,200 at the reception. But in the case of that wedding gown, there was no name given. There was no response from her in terms of saying who made this 50 yards of ivory taffeta creation that you were wearing. And in not speaking her name, she's erased from history. All of those contributions that she made, all of those famous people that she designed for, the fact that she was a designer, right? Some of us, when we think of fashion designers, we think back to the early 80s. So that's when black fashion designers came out. No, it was before that. So my purpose in terms of what I do is to try to restore that and push back that timeline so that students of fashion, of black history, whatever, can come to know that someone like Ann Lowe existed and contributed mightily. It's like, if you're looking at it, your phone or whatever, it's one of the most photographed wedding gowns in history. That a black woman was behind that, and she did many other marvelous and miraculous things in terms of what it took to be a fashion designer, to have a shop in New York on Lexington Avenue, and maintain that for a long time, as difficult as it was. So, Kelly?
Hello, I'm Kelly DeLong. I write fiction and creative nonfiction, and I created the creative writing minor that we have here. So if there are any of you who are interested in creative writing here while you're at CAU, please come and see me. I'm in 115 Haven Warren. Be happy to talk to you about the minor, which includes fiction writing. We have 2 classes in fiction writing. We have 2 classes in creative nonfiction, which I'll talk about that in a minute. We have 2 classes in poetry. We're having a new poet come this fall, we're excited about. And we also have a class in putting together the CAU Review, which is our literary magazine. And we are putting that together right now, some of the classes in this room right now. And we are having a reading in which we are celebrating the student writers that we have here. Our reading will be next Thursday, the 20th, at 6 o'clock in Carl Mary Ware 201. I'll say that one more time in case anybody wants to write that down. We will have a flyer hopefully posted outside the English office. That is on Thursday the 20th in Carl Mary Ware 201 at 6 o'clock. Okay, what we're doing this year is not only will we have students who are published in this year's literary magazine, but we are republishing some of the best of the CAU Review, which goes back, I think we're in our 7th edition now. And so we're going to be reading works also from past editions and reprinting them. So it should be a fun night. Students always love hearing themselves and hearing what other students are capable of. And I guarantee you, that we have some great pieces of writing that we are publishing once again in the CAU Review, and it will be something that all students always tell me that is the highlight of their semester when they put together this magazine and see what students can do. Also, I want to talk about creative nonfiction here. I have become more of a creative nonfiction writer than fiction. Piper can tell you, she and I were students a long time ago at Georgia State in our PhD program, last century writing fiction. Sorry, Piper. Sorry, Piper. And I have turned largely to creative nonfiction, which is more or less writing things that really happened, but in writing them in such ways that a fiction writer would use. And I just want to pitch my class for this fall. I'll be teaching Introduction to Creative Nonfiction. It is always the best class that I teach. It always produces the best writing, because when it comes to, you'll be writing about things that really happened, not things you think you need to make up for your fiction classes. What happens in fiction classes is students think they need to write about superheroes because that's what the movies tell you people are interested in. And then they start writing about things that just they don't have no idea about. So in a creative nonfiction class, you are writing about yourself. You are writing about the things that happened to you. And those stories are the most important stories for you to tell. And I've had students over the years tell me time and time again that was writing what they needed to write and getting it on the page, and then having the class help them to make it a better piece was a transformative experience for them. So if there's anybody interested in taking my creative nonfiction class, it will be offered in the fall. It's Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I think it's at 1 o'clock. I have to double check that.
I was going to ask you, I think you answered my question. Why is creative nonfiction so popular among young writers?
Yeah.
Not just young writers, just writers.
I think, people think the students think when they come to fiction classes, and you two might have experiences, they have to make everything up. Everything has to be completely made up. And so they don't work with character, they don't work with things that really happened or feel real, and so they struggle with this idea, have to completely make something up. And I always tell them that's not what you have to do. But when they come to creative nonfiction, we'll look at past writers, student writers, and they'll read things that they can't imagine another student would actually write about. And when they read that, they're like, oh, we can write about those things that happened to me. And then their desire to want to get those stories out and write them as well as they possibly can seems to be the reason why nonfiction is so popular, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
Vastly popular.
That desire to, and I know fiction writers can attest to this all times too. When they read a piece of fiction, what do people always say? Did this happen to you? Is this real? And the fiction writer says, well, it's based on actual events, but I'm not writing about me per se. It's fiction. But you don't have to ask that when it's nonfiction. When it's nonfiction, you don't have to ask that question. You just read what happened to me, and that is often what excites students about nonfiction.
I'm pleased for it. I mean, it just really has roused a whole group of people who didn't know they were writers and didn't know they could write that way.
Yeah, and the CAU review that we're publishing this semester was testament to that. The creative nonfiction pieces, there's more of them than anything else. There's more of them than the poems and the fiction. It's the creative nonfiction that I go back to over and over again. It's the heart of our magazine. Yeah. So hopefully I'll see some of you in my classes in the fall.
I was going to say one more thing. I saw a very wise person once said, I don't know if it was on Twitter when you said this, or if you told me in person. I can't remember. Thinking time is writing time. I think that freed me to a certain extent.
I absolutely had that experience. My mentor, who I was talking about earlier, had this beautiful home on St. Simon's, right on the beach, overlooking Jekyll Island, and his office was right in the front, of course, overlooking Jekyll Island. And I wrote part of Baby of the Family there because I didn't have a computer. And he had his computer, so he was writing 7 or one of his best-selling novels or whatever. And he'd finish, and he'd call and say, we were friends by then, his wife and my husband. And he'd say, there's a Bill computer down, IBM computer down here, nobody's on. And so he gave me a word processor from Radio Shack. We had nothing. We moved to St. Simons. We had nothing. We were freelancers, but it didn't have a printer, but it had a great modem. You all remember modems? Okay. And it had a modem. And so I would type up my, if I was working on Baby of the Family, because he had told me if I got 100 pages together, he'd show it to his agent. His agent was the head of William Morris, Owen Laster. And so we were really heading for something. And so, but I would be writing. And then, of course, the view was just so beautiful. I'd just sit there and be looking out. I'd look a lot of times. And once he came in, I jumped like, oh, I should be writing. And he said, hey, calm down. He says, thinking time is writing time. And oh gosh, one of the wisest things he ever taught me. And that is, you don't just rush and put it down. It reads like you rushed and put it down. I know, people who will say, oh, girl, I wrote that book in 7 weeks. You want to say it reads like you wrote it in 7 weeks. But because it does. If you want something to be thoughtful and, want other people to think about it, you have to think about it. And, and if you're writing something and somebody hasn't come in and caught you staring out the window, then you're not doing something right. You're doing it wrong. You've got to think about what you're writing. It's the difference between your first draft and your final draft.
And draft is important.
Drafts. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, your first draft. Your first draft is never going to be the final one. I mean, I'm sure there's some people who have done that and created something wonderful, but usually, and it gets better. And the thing that I love the editing process. I was an editor of the newspaper before I did anything, right out of Spelman. But I always liked editing because I always understood we're making this better. I always understood, this wasn't tearing anything down and taking me out of it and putting the editor in it. This is making it better, more thoughtful, thicker, richer. I think of writing like I think of cooking. Like you could, like a casserole or Napoleon. If you just like chocolate, you can just peel off that chocolate. But if you take a bite in it, that's a whole nother experience. So that's what you want your writing to be, layered and thoughtful. And it can't be that way unless you think. Thinking time is writing time.
Yes, absolutely.
And it frees you, too. I love that.
Yeah, no, it did. It did. You hear the truism about that you need to write every day, for instance. When everybody talks about this, like if you write every day, it just makes you a writer or whatever. But some people are not able to do that. And so putting a certain amount of thought into the story, even when you're not sitting there at the, so for instance, in terms of creating by her own design, me as someone who is not someone who sews or designs, I have a little baby quilt in a bag somewhere in the back of my closet. There's a lot of pink and blue triangles that just didn't get finished, right? I don't do what Ann Lowe did, but thinking about her process and what went into that and the language that she would use as part of that process, as part of her life, is part of what enabled me to, like I said, think about what it would be like to be in her shoes as a young, when she started out, a black woman in Jim Crow, Alabama in the early 20th century. That's all part of it. And like I said, that freed me. So it makes me wonder where he got it from, because it's like this narrative of passing that wisdom down. It makes me wonder where he got that from. So what's your process, though?
The process. I love that question.
Oh, that was the other thing you said, too, is respect your process.
Oh, my God.
I did get that from her, too.
First thing you have to do. Okay, this is good. I think you reminded me about something. This is good. Okay, first of all, everyone has a process. And when someone in the audience asks the writer, they tell you, I can tell you my process, but that's my process. You know, what you really should be looking for is, when do I write best? Do I write best in the morning or the evening? Do I write best under pressure, or do I really need to have things quiet? You know, do I need music on? Ask yourself all these questions. Look at what you did, what you've written that you're really proud of, and say, how did I create this? Did I have music on? Did I, make everybody leave? Did I go somewhere else so it was quiet? What was my process? And your process changes. My favorite, my perfect day, I don't have many of those anymore. I used to for years. I'd get up in the morning and I'd get something to eat, and I'd go out in the garden and work really hard. There's something about getting my body tired. That's part of my process too. My body tired and my mind just goes. Have you had that experience? It's something about that. And so I like to, turn the compost pile dirty, sweaty work, and then come in, about, sometime in the afternoon, take a shower, get something to eat, sit down on the computer and start writing, and I look up and it's dark. Oh God, isn't that the best feeling in the world? You look up and it's dark. You've lost track of time. And I like to, write into the morning until 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and then go to sleep and get up and do the same thing again. Now that's my process. Yeah, but I don't have days like that anymore. So you have to find out what your process is. After you find your process, after you discover that, okay, I need a house quiet. I need it quiet to work. I don't need the house quiet. I need quiet to work. So where am I going to find quiet? Do I have to go somewhere else? Do I have to ask, for y'all, leave the house for, 2 hours on Saturday or whatever? And then once you get that process, this was my lesson, respect it. Mm-hmm. Because you can find yourself out of that process and not creating anything and wonder why you're not getting anything. You forgot your process. Go back to your process. Go back to the way the way it happened from the beginning. Yeah.
And I think so much of what people talk about right every day, it seems like it makes people feel ashamed of their process. Then we'll give it to Kelly. I just wanted to say, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry. Because I learned this from Tayari Jones, who is my Spelman sister. Mm-hmm. Spelman sister who got an honorary doctorate this week at Spelman that I found this day. And I saw her on one of the late night shows when she was like, I guess American Marriage, when she was everywhere. And whatever the guy's name is on late night, asked her, did she write every day? And she taught me such a lesson. She said, such a privilege to write every day. People work every day. People have jobs. People have children. People have lives. People have your responsibilities. No, most people can't write every day. And of course, that's what I've been teaching for years, y'all, okay? And as soon as she said it, I was like, oh my God, yeah, that is true. So it's completely changed how I teach. You have to write consistently.
Right. Consistently.
So I'll just talk a little bit on my process. I don't compose on a computer. I compose on a legal pad, and this is what works for me. And as we said, you gotta find what works for you. Writing in the morning is definitely when I feel as though I love starting the day with something that really engages my mind. So I only work like one paragraph at a time. So I might write that first paragraph 20 different times, and when I come back to it the next day, I copy it again. And I copy it and I copy and copy it until I'm satisfied with it, and then I move on to the next paragraph. And there are days where I come back to what I wrote the day before and I read over it, and if I'm not excited about rewriting that, then I throw it away and start again. So if you want your writing to excite your readers, has to excite you. And for me, the test is to write it over and over and over again until I think that I'm going to be excited to see this again tomorrow. And if I am, I'll rewrite it and I'll move on. And that has been my process, because what happens a lot of times, and I'll see students do this, they'll write a piece of, it might be fiction or creative nonfiction, from beginning to end in one day. And if you think that you can turn in a high quality piece from beginning to end and you just write it in one day, I guarantee you that would not meet your test of high quality writing if you were to read that over and over and over again. And so that is advice that I give. If your piece is going to bore you over and over again, it's going to bore your reader. So always keep that in mind.
I call verse drafts vomit drafts for that purpose. You don't want to look at vomit. No. So the point is to get it out. And another way which people talk about first drafts can also be thought of, it's you telling the story to yourself. So it's not about telling it to other people, it's about you telling it to yourself, and then you can go back in and layer in, all of the details and everything that will, the language, all that stuff. And several people, and part of my process, if I do that, I do a first draft, it may be that my next draft will focus on character, and my next draft might focus on language, so you have a different focus every time, potentially, but that first draft is not it. So, do we want to take questions now, in terms of that? So.
I've heard you speak on several occasions, and one of the things that has been coming through today was this whole idea about doing homework. Tiffany, I said in the earlier session that literature saves.
Yes.
Literature uplifts spirit.
Yes.
Literature creates a safe space to talk about painful things. Literature also offers ways of healing. And I've often heard you say that when you're writing, you're in a state of grace. Could you elaborate on that? I like that. So.
You said that.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I was going to say, you talk about state of grace too? Okay, I thought I found a sister. I did. I had a friend who was like my first writing friend, who, we were both trying to get published. And so we exchanged. She lived in North Georgia, I lived down here. And we were talking about hearing certain sounds that we wanted to incorporate in our writing. And she said that she had walked through Sears in Roebuck. This is in the 80s. And that she had taken a shortcut through the little girls department, and they had brought back crinoline skirts. Anybody know what crinoline skirts? Yeah, I know. With little girls with wide skirts, they have those little slips underneath it that make it stand out, and crinoline. And she said that, and they come and go. That the fashion comes and goes for little girls like it does for us. And she walked through the children's department, and she brushed against us, and she heard that swish, swish, swish. She said she hadn't heard that since she was a little girl, and she had worn it. And she said in the middle of Sears, she screamed, "Oh, I must have it!" Meaning the sound. I mean, we're all a little crazy, so we're all a little eccentric. But she heard that sound, and she was just so excited about it. And she says, and I laughed at her about saying that. And she says, "Well, Tina," she says, "when you're doing what you're supposed to do, writing consistently." Not writing every day, but writing consistently, respecting your writing, setting boundaries for what people can and cannot interrupt you, setting yourself deadlines, all of these things, that you're in the state of grace and things come to you. And isn't that the truth? Yeah. It's the truth in life. You have a neighbor and you hear him over there and he has this bad cough and nobody's taking care of him, and you say, that he needs a good pot of soup. That's what he needs, But you don't have a car, you can't get to the grocery store, and you really want to do this. And you go to your pantry and you go, "Oh Lord, I got a can of tomatoes in there I forgot I had." And you got neck bones in the freezer. You got something to make soup with. You have things. You're in the state of grace. People will come to you when you're doing what you're supposed to, and I know y'all have had this experience. Somebody will knock on your door and give you what you need. When you are intent on doing am I right? And doing the right thing. And the same thing happens when you're writing, when you're respecting your work and working every day, sticking to your process, finding your process, then sticking to it. Sticking to it, not letting family laugh at you and say, "Oh, you threw up in the back seat going to Florida when you were 5 years old. You can't write no book." Family will say the craziest shit to you, because they're challenged by what you're doing. They really are. You got to put that in your mind. All that, they're just challenged. You're doing what you said you were going to do. God, that means I said I was going to start that business. Now I got to, so they're trying to pull you away. Let's go shopping. Let's go to the mall. Let's go to a movie. They'll do anything to, and they know They know your weak points. So, oh, let's go get some Dunkin' Donuts. Let's go get some, they don't know, you know exactly what to say to you. And, you have to be strong about this because your work has to be more important than donuts. Just that simple. That's a nice quote. I didn't know that. It is. Like, maybe have to use that. Huh? Your work has to be more important than donuts. It does. It has to be important than all these other things.
There's a question over here.
Ooh, question.
Well, as I've said, my why in terms of my entering into what I call this phase 2 of my writing is to uplift these erased women and their artistry. I think a lot of drawing upon which a text that many of you all might know, Alice Walker's In Search for Our Mother's Gardens, thinking about the ways in which Black women have been able to perform art and to do art that may not look like the ways in which society says it's art. It's pretty much all about where I am right now in terms of what it is that I do. And I think part of that is telling other people that it's okay to do your art, to do your creativity. In terms of what Alice Walker talks about in that book, it's her mother who gardened in this beautiful way and put her gardens together in terms of color or whatever, or if it's quilting or whatever it is, cooking, right? Yeah, exactly. Whatever it is, that's what to do. So for me, that's the why. I think a lot of us don't, like you're saying, in ways that people will try to stop you from doing what it is that you do. Yeah, he was like, yeah, I remember when you were one and you peed in that chair at the bank and I had to go buy new clothes for you so you could get your picture taken. Why are you telling me this? This is, it's just the kind of thing that, family members will do to say, yeah, don't get too big for your britches or whatever, kind of thing. And you have to watch out for that kind of thing. Yeah.
The
And
world tries to undermine our
yeah.
artists. You got to keep that in mind. The world tries to undermine us.
Yeah.
We challenge anybody who will create us, not just the artists. Can I ask you to talk a little bit about erasure? You were talking about erasure when you were, and I'm very, very interested in that, especially Black women.
Yeah.
Who are just completely erased. Can you talk about that?
Well, as I said, Ann Lowe had been erased when her name was not uttered, right? Or it's the way in which she's not talked about. And as another aspect of this project, at least for me, also came from ensuring that Black women who do scholarship, and a lot of your professors are doing scholarship above and beyond the work of teaching. And for a lot of people, it impacts their health. You just talk to any Black female professors about who was with you in school and who's not here anymore in their 50s and stuff. This particular case in terms of Ann Lowe and recovering her from erasure was a young textile scholar who was 38 when she died of breast cancer. And that Ann Lowe had been her thesis project that she wrote her thesis about, and was preparing to write a scholarly biography about her and to have the exhibit that an artist should have, right, when she died. And I think one of the things that a lot of scholars worry about is, if I don't do the scholarship, who's going to do it? What's going to happen to it? So in my way, this historical fiction novel is a way of bringing Margaret's work back to the fore. And I say in the dedication, I wish for two things: the exhibit to happen and the biography to happen. The exhibit is happening in September. It'll happen in winter, at the Winter Thur and outside of Philadelphia. 40 of Ann Lowe's gowns have come together for the first time to be exhibited. The University of Delaware had young Black women reconstructing Jackie Kennedy's wedding gown so they can see what it's like, You know, and it's on Instagram. It's under winterthird.org. If you want to go see these young scholars who worked on having to do that dress, and it's like, Lord help us. 50 yards of ivory taffeta. So yeah, between September, which is the 70th anniversary commemoration of Jack and Jackie's wedding, to early January. So if you're in the Philadelphia environs or whatever, you need to go see it. Yeah, so the other aspect in terms of her scholarly biography, we all know, those of us who are scholars, those take years and years and years to do, and lots of money for such a project. So I call this my offering to hopefully get somebody to take up what Margaret unfortunately had to lay down when she lost her life, and to finish that work, because Ann Lowe's worth it.
So I'm just going to talk about why I write. It's not as lofty as what Piper is talking about. I guess in my case, growing up, I was not a reader, and I know that goes for most students today. I did not read a single thing when I was growing up, and I'm not proud of that. I watched a lot of TV, but one thing I knew when I was growing up, there was something inside of me that needed a release. I did not know what that was. As I got older and I was in high school, I thought I was a poet. And I would write these things I called poems, but I didn't read poetry. And when you don't read poetry and you think song lyrics are poetry, yeah, that's not poetry, and that's not what you're writing. And it took me a while to find my way to college. I found my way to community college after working for a while, and I was told that my composition professor was also a poet. And I thought, great, I'll give him some of my work, and he's going to love it. And I gave him some of my work, and I came back the next day, and I said, Mr. Martin, what do you think about my poems? And he just went, and he handed them back to me. Okay, that wasn't the thing. That wasn't what's inside of me. And then I stumbled upon, it was actually a composition class, and it was taught like a literature course. It wasn't composition, it was straight literature, analysis, everything that we try to do in 300 level courses, my professor was doing in 100 level course. He gave us an assignment. We had to read a very long short story, and I wasn't going to read it. It was pool night. I was shooting pool with my friends. We did this every Wednesday night. It was in a bowling alley, and the balls are crashing into the pins, and we're up in the pool table, and I'm running the table. I was doing great, and as long as you kept winning, you stayed on. And eventually, I lost. And I thought, I'll kill time until I play again, and I'll read the story. I'll read parts of it. And I got so hooked on that story that I lost where I was. I completely did not hear the sounds around me. I didn't hear anything until I was done with that story, and it was a long one, and I looked up. And I was in a place. I remembered I was in a pool alley, and my friends said, "What is with you, DeLong? We're telling you to play pool with us." I'm like, I didn't know what was going on. And I knew then and there from reading that short story, and then we went on to read other things in that class, that the thing that was inside of me was writing prose. And what I learned then was it didn't matter. I never thought about an audience. I always just write. It's what we were talking about before. When you have those couple hours to write and you're in a completely other world, there's nothing else going on around you because you're not conscious of it. That's so precious. And that's what writing is. It's not about, I try to tell students, it's not about being published. Okay, it's not about worrying about your audience or anything like that, or even having an audience. It's about that time that you spend inside your head and being amazing yourself, which I always try to amaze myself with my writing. I don't always amaze other people, but I amaze myself. Having those couple hours to yourself in thought and getting out that thing that's inside of you, that's what a writer is. It's a person with something inside of them that needs to be brought out, whether no one ever reads it ever. Doesn't matter. You created it. That's what writing is. That's why I write.
More questions? We have a couple minutes. There's like 4 more minutes.
No, I was just going to segue into
Okay.
that.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have a 3 o'clock session on how to get these stories published. So I do know that some of you are willing. We ask that you do so discreetly. But we also have published authors here whose books are here that you can have signed. We have also purchased books for some students to have signed as well. So if you're interested in having a book, Dr. DeLong, do we have any of yours?
I didn't check it.
Okay, we have a couple for Dr. Hughley by her design, and we have several by Tina Macro-Ansa. We have we don't have Baby of the Family, which tells the story of little Lena who's born with a caul over her face. An amazing story about magic, about ghosts, about spirit.
I am blessed to have Dr. Montgomery love my writing. She has blessed me in any way. I was at her house last night, and I was looking at the book you published. Spirit in the Word, exactly. And one of the chapters is on Baby of the Family. And she looks at Baby of the Family from a viewpoint of Elifa. And also just from her country upbringing and she really, I had to thank her this morning. We forget all the people who support us. And we don't forget them. It's just that, sometimes we kind of take them for granted. And I'm sure I was effusive when I first saw the book. But in reading it again, what I really was thinking is how grateful I was that not just for you, but for all the folks who write about our work and take our work seriously and, examine it and turn it upside down and come up with things that we never intended to have in our work and see the brilliance in it. And I do appreciate that.
So her other novel is The Hand I Fanned With, that we have copies of, and it picks up the story of Lena as a 45-year-old successful woman who's alone because she sees ghosts and all of this other
Got lots of stuff.
and she falls in love, and she has this amazing, erotic, spiritual, sexy relationship with Herman, her man. Who's a ghost?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's been watching her for 100 years. He's the ghost of a family that he was never enslaved. He was a maroon. His family, his mother and father ran away.
So anyway, we do have that book available for you all.
And Meeting at the Table. I also have Meeting at the Table.
You want to talk about Meeting
I'd
at the
love
Table?
to talk about Meeting at the Table. Thank you. Meeting at the Table is a collection of essays by African American women. It's called Meeting at the Table, African American Women Write on Race, Culture, and Community. And it is my freshman college roommate from Spelman, Wanda Lloyd, who's a journalist and a professor. It was our first time working together. It was our response to 2020. My husband of 46 years died in January of 2020. Oh, and then we had Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and then the pandemic, and just really, excuse me, but 2020 sucked. I was going to say something else, but it really did. And so it was Wanda and I got together, just on the phone talking. She lives in Savannah, I live on St. Simons, and we wanted to do something. And as Wanda said, we're women of a certain age. We weren't going to get out there in the streets and protest, but we remember when in confusion you forget your agency. You really got to remember that, in confusion, you forget your agency. And Wanda said, well, what do we do? And I said, we write, we edit. She says, well, that's right, let's do a book. And it was like, let's put on a show kind of thing. Well, I have a publishing company, well, I just published a book, So, we were on a phone call in June 12th. That's when we had the phone call, because I called Wanda and I said, how you doing? And Wanda's my go-to girlfriend. She's always doing well. And she said, I'm not doing well at all. She says, I can't sleep. I'm sleepy. You know, I've lost my appetite. I'm angry all the time. I'm inappropriate in situations, all the rest. That's why we said we had to do something. We had to do something in response to all these things that were bombarding our lives, and especially people of color, especially black folks. And so we decided to do a book, and the book of essays was what we came, and we wanted to give voice to black women. And so we decided to do black women only, not just women of color, but black African-American women, and just to speak from their experience on race, culture, and community, on, you know, how has it affected them in a personal way. These were personal essays, how it affected them, and also a way forward. Because we titled it Meeting at the Table, because we got to get together, even with people we don't want to get together with. I mean, who wants to sit around? Honestly, who wants to sit around and talk about race? And, you know, but we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to come to the table. So I know that a book is a safe place. I did discover that with Ugly Ways. It's a safe place where people can talk about things. They're talking about the book. They're not talking about themselves. They're talking about their family. They're talking about the book. So I knew that the book is a good place to start. And on June 12th, we decided, you know, we're going to have publish this book, and we just reached out. We reached out to everybody. Ava DuVernay said no, she didn't have enough bandwidth to do it, but Onward, she gave us an Onward and 2 exclamation points, which I treasure, as you can imagine. Latasha Brown tried to do it up until like I said, we finally had to say, you just don't have time. You got bigger things to do. So she did that, but the people who said yes, you know, were the right people. Keisha Lance Bottoms, the former mayor, said yes. She wrote a wonderful essay, A Prayer for Her Children. Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie wrote an essay. We thought she was going to talk about religion, and she talked about have to fight the white girls in the bathroom of the school that she integrated when she was in high school. I mean, these women just really talked about, a lot of them, a number of them, queer women who talked about being seen and not being able to bring their whole self into the black community, not just into the community at large. I mean, we got these wonderful, wonderful, Peachy Wimbush Polk. She's, Wiz Khalifa. The rapper, Peachy Wimbush Polk, is his mom, and she wrote beautifully about, her essay was hip-hop versus doo-wop, and she talked about the difference in generations. I mean, we got these wonderful essays, and we got them in 1 year. We have 15 contributors. We started on June 12th, and on November 30th of 2020, I had books in my hand. You're in the state of grace. And a podcast. Have a podcast with my partner, with Wanda Lloyd. It's called Two Old Chicks Who Know a Lot of Shit. Please subscribe and follow. I have been told to do that. And it's 2 with a numeral, because if you put TWO, you get some woman out in Iowa raising chickens. And that's not who you want. You want 2 old chicks. If you put in 2 old chicks, should is SH asterisk T. Yeah, asterisk T. But that's who we are.
For how to color. So would you all like to stay around for both panels, and then we do the book signing afterwards? Because we do have books for students that we are gifting to some. So hang around for the next panel. And I think our conversation will continue, because as we talk about minding our own goals, telling stories, how to get those stories to a wider audience, which we all want. Right? And all of y'all got stories to tell. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I know that Dr. Elon, I'm more like you. I'm less than like the 2 of the ladies, because I don't feel that the gold running through my veins. However, I have a need to write. And that need is not a creative need, but I still would like to have it published to the best of anyone's ability, including mine. So I'm looking for, when do you know you finished editing? I'm looking for, what are the reasons, or how to ask the question, what are the reasons you're writing this book? Anything you can tell me, because I intend on considering your class.
Okay, great.
Because I already
Gary.
would like to know when to stop editing.
Okay. Yeah, it is best to be part of a workshop, whether it's formal workshop at a university in a class or informal workshops where you have friends who are readers who know what they're talking about. The thing that I have my students do is they write 2 pieces, and then they decide which one they want to rewrite. And then we rewrite it, and then we look at it again. So what we're doing in the class is constantly rewriting, letting the student, so the class lets the student know what needs to be done with the next draft. Okay, you mastered this section, now this needs to be worked on. And so what you need to do outside of a classroom. Classrooms are, for me, that's where I learned how to really look at my work through other people's eyes, and that's the most important thing. If your goal is to make your piece of writing better, you need to be able to anticipate what other people are going to say and understand how they're viewing your piece of writing. So a workshop is good for that, and that's how I run my classes. But then when you're like us and you're no longer in a workshop, have someone who's very, very well read who helps you out. My person, she just left, is Dr. Foster Singletary. I read pieces aloud to her, and I said, tell me what's wrong with this. And she tells me, and she's honest, and that's what you need. You need someone who's very well read, someone who will give you honest opinion, and someone who's not just there to be your friend and impress you by saying, I think it's wonderful. So that's why you should never have your mom and your dad help you, or anyone in your family for that matter. No one in your family should ever be the person you take. So you want someone who's going to give you good advice, and they know what they're talking about because they are a reader. And what I've had to do with Dr. Foster Singletary, she's a scholar. She's not trained as a career writer, and she's not viewing pieces of writing as something that needs to be worked on. That's scholars think this is a fixed piece, it's perfect as it is, and then I'm going to analyze pieces of it. But if you're a career writer, you read it differently from a scholar, because a career writer is constantly looking for something to make it better. How do I make this piece of writing better? So everything I read in literary magazines, I'm always constantly asking myself, what would I do to make this piece of writing better? And it's not my piece, it's someone else's. That's what you need. That's what you need. And hopefully a career writing workshop will help you in that process. Yeah.
How do you know when to move on?
Yeah.
I mean, from that first paragraph.
Oh, from the first paragraph.
How do you know when to move on?
When I keep adding to it, and I still want to rewrite it, it still excites me. If it still excites me, then I move on to the next paragraph.
The prospects of rewriting and making it better.
Yeah.
If you're excited about that.
Right.
Okay.
So I guess that's it. We're closing in on 3 o'clock. Thank you. Oh, she got one more question. Hi. Go ahead.
Okay, so honestly, how do you start? Like, I understand the process, finding your process, and each time be consistent with it. Not every day, but be consistent. But sometimes like I find myself having so much to say, but just not knowing how to start.
Start with the heart of the conflict. My advice to myself is always start with a scene. Start with a scene, especially for short pieces. Start with the scene, get right to the heart of the conflict. What is the conflict? What is the internal conflict? Start there. Start there. And then that might not be that where you start. No, these are novelists up here. I've only published one. I am not a novelist, so they're going to give you different advice. But for short pieces, start with a scene. Get the conflict going. That's my advice. I'm sure novelists have different...
Get a bucket of glue and make sure you're sitting yourself down in your chair so you can write. Sometimes it is a question of just writing and then, figuring out what it is that is really about where that goal runs through. I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of people, is just doing it. Thank you so much.